We're approaching the 3-week mark for Path of Exile 2's 0.5 update, and all signs point towards this being the most successful patch since the early access launch back in December 2024. The largest factor there, of course, is the huge endgame overhaul that came alongside the Return of the Ancients update, providing a true sense of purpose and direction for the Infinite Atlas world map once the campaign has come to a close. However, 0.5 wasn't just a content update, it also came alongside some balance changes, 2 brand new Ascendancy classes, and some overhauls to a handful of existing Ascendancy classes, not to mention the massive changes to crafting and plenty of new runes and endgame unique items. And all of this combined has had quite the impact on what's being played in the Return of the Ancients. So let's begin with the incredible dominance of the Martial Artist, the third and final Monk Ascendancy option which is new in 0.5. Now the Martial Artist has easily taken hold of the top Ascendancy spot in softcore trade Runes of Aldur, with 25% of all of the level 90 plus characters in the league choosing this Ascendancy. And whilst you could chalk this up to the fact that this is a new Ascendancy in a release that didn't include an entirely new class, there's certainly something more to the Martial Artist that has made it so popular for 0.5. Part of this rise is also reflected in the huge decline of the Invoker, down from about 4% of characters at the same point in time in the previous league to just 0.2% right now in the current league. In fact, the Invoker is the least played Ascendancy in patch 0.5 despite receiving no direct nerfs in the patch notes. And this is largely due to the Martial Artist simply providing much more bang for your buck when it comes to how much power you're gaining from the Ascendancy choice. This Ascendancy has quickly claimed several well-performing quarterstaff builds, the most notable being the Hollow Form Whirling Assault combo that's just able to cover the entire screen in massive sweeping AoEs that also deal huge amounts of damage, making it extremely effective at farms like Ritual or the new Breach Fortresses. However, it's also important to note just how strong this setup is defensively. Since you're able to cover such a huge area, it's hard for anything to get in range to hit you, and this also means that you can deal damage from much further away than you typically would do with a quarterstaff build. Now, part of that Hollow Form setup involves the use of Nocturnal Caress, which is a pair of low-level unique gloves that usually don't find much use at all. But the Martial Artist has a notable that changes all of that: the Way of the Stonefist. This node transforms your equipped gloves, and Nocturnal Caress becomes a charge generation powerhouse, allowing your summoned clones to grant you charges which are then used to empower Hollow Form to spawn even more clones. And I think now would be a good time to mention that this is not just the most popular Ascendancy node in the game right now, but it's literally being taken on every single Martial Artist level 90 and over in every single league type. Softcore Trade, SSF, Hardcore, and HC SSF. Every single Martial Artist is clicking Way of the Stonefist. And this is credit to the crazy amount of build diversity that this node is able to support, as you're able to convert any gloves you equip, with many of the unique glove options providing interesting options that can enable a wide variety of builds. Now, on the topic of the Martial Artist, the last thing I want to discuss here is the weapon swap, and how it's dominated by Talismans in 0.5 due to the incredible utility provided by Rend, Pounce, and Devour. Almost half of level 90 plus Martial Artists in softcore trade Runes of Aldur are choosing to use a Talisman in their weapon swap, as this enables a movement skill in Pounce, which is almost as popular this league compared to the last, despite a big drop off in Druid builds and the direct nerf it received in this patch. But the Talisman doesn't just provide utility for movement, it also enables an easy but powerful power charge consumer in Rend to grant a huge damage boost, and on top of that you can even use Devour to add an extra power charge generator if you need to. I suspect that as new classes and new weapon types are added to Path of Exile 2 over time, we'll see new options to compete with the Talisman for utility, but as of right now, it's king in this area. Now, the Martial Artist may be the most popular Ascendancy in 0.5, but the other new Ascendancy in this patch, the Spirit Walker, has also made quite the splash, coming in second on the Ascendancy ladder at 18% of level 90 plus builds. One of the interesting parts for the rise of this ascendancy in the Return of the Ancients update is the almost even split between the two extremely popular Spirit Walker builds, Twister on one side and the Tamed Beast boss on the other. These two setups make up approximately 95% of level 90 plus Spirit Walkers in softcore trade Runes of Aldur, which is not surprising either, as before the League launched, it was quite obvious that Twister was going to be one of the primary starters for this update. Meanwhile, there was a lot of hype and uncertainty surrounding the Beast boss taming, which ended up being more powerful than I think most would have expected, with a ridiculous 25% base crit chance on the Tamed Monkey, and I do wonder if that was a late change to ensure these builds didn't fall flat on launch. Okay, so that's the Martial Artist and the Spirit Walker making up almost half of the characters combined, but just behind them is the Deadeye, which has made quite the resurgence this league, up from about 4% at the same time in Fate of the Val, to 11% of characters in Return of the Ancients. Notably, this ascendancy didn't receive any direct changes in the 0.5 patch notes, but it has remained as a generically strong projectile class in an expanding sea of more niche options. In addition to that, the deflection formula was also improved this patch to provide a much higher yield with investment, and this combined with Ice Shot providing natural access to chill and freeze has shored up the defences of a class that has been lacking since the removal of Wind Ward in 0.4. Now, speaking of defences, one of the major critiques for Path of Exile 2 during the early access period has been the extreme imbalance of basic defences across classes and the passive tree, and patch 0.5 has attempted to bring some of those defensive options a bit more in line, with several targeted nerfs towards energy shield recovery, but this hasn't really had the impact that they may have hoped for. Energy Shield is still as dominant as ever, and it's still the go-to method to obtain a large hit pool. Chaos Inoculation is still the most popular keystone by far. In fact, it has even gained a percentage point league on league, and really, if anything, the changes to Energy Shield in patch 0.5 have only made it more awkward to play with Energy Shield as your primary hit pool, but the changes haven't made this form of defense feel any less mandatory, and this is mostly due to still being able to obtain so much of it compared to life. Now, remaining on the topic of defences for a moment, one of the big winners defensively for patch 0.5 has been the Chronomancer, which received quite a big rework including the addition of Phased Form, an incredibly powerful new node for damage reduction. As expected, this has had a much larger impact over in the hardcore modes for Runes of Aldur, where this ascendancy has approximately quadrupled its play rate league on league. In the softcore variants of the league, the Chronomancer hasn't seen quite as much of a boost, but another ascendancy that also received a pretty large rework to some of its nodes certainly has, and that is of course the Gemling Legionnaire, rescued from the bottom of the ascendancy ladder where it's been since the catastrophic nerfs of patch 0.2, well, that's no more. The Gemling Legionnaire is actually the fourth most popular ascendancy for level 90 plus characters, just beating the Oracle to this spot, and this one has to be mentioned if not just for the massive build diversity making up all of these characters. This is due to the change to Advanced Thaumaturgy, which now grants an additional quality stat to skill gems that enables the Gemling to scale some skills in ways that were previously impossible to do. The interesting thing here is how similar this node is to the Martial Artist's Way of the Stonefist in its design, with both offering this rich customization element that extends beyond just the most obvious use case, as is normal with most other powerful ascendancy options, letting the player decide on build customization elements at a much deeper level. Advanced Thaumaturgy and Way of the Stonefist are both undeniably popular within their respective classes, and I wonder if GGG will see this as something they may wish to play into for future ascendancies or even unique items or skills. Now, another big shift that must be mentioned for patch 0.5 is the decline of shapeshifting skills for main skills used in builds, with both Oracle and more notably the Shaman losing a lot of ground compared to other ascendancy options. The Shaman, in fact, is one of the least played ascendancies in 0.5, sharing the same play rate as the Acolyte of Chayula. And this does make sense considering that the Druid and shapeshifting was entirely new in the Fate of the Val League, But since the power level of shapeshifting builds in general was largely untouched in 0.5 outside of global crafting changes, I would have expected a bit of a smaller decline overall. But despite dropping about 2/3 of its share from the last league, the Oracle Ascendancy still remains as quite a popular choice, with Spell Totem and Plant builds dominating on this class. Okay, let's move on to a bit of discussion on the meta for item usage, as there's a few interesting topics here. The first is the huge amount of characters using Lavianga's Spirits. Now, this was already a popular flask in patch 0.4, with about a third of level 90 plus characters making use of it 3 weeks in. But for patch 0.5, that has increased to over half of all of the level 90 plus characters at a massive 55% share. Lavianga's Spirits is a mana flask that doesn't need to be activated manually, instead simply providing passive recovery all of the time. And I think the popularity of this flask is telling of a deeper issue here. There's not really too many cost-effective ways to solve mana problems in Path of Exile 2, and this then usually results in a lot of mana flask usage, especially earlier on into character progression. But if players can get away with freeing up the use of a button, then they're going to do that if they can, even if that means investing a little bit extra into cost efficiency to make it work. And I expect that this unique will remain as one of the most popular items in each and every league as long as its mechanics remain the same. Now, on the topic of popular unique items, this patch introduced the chase item from Path of Exile 1, the Mageblood Belt, and it has made quite the splash in its debut patch. Mageblood essentially grants PoE 1 flask style buffs, and it finally provides some competition for Headhunter in PoE 2. However, there's a bit more going on here, because the belt slot in Path of Exile 2 has been one of the weakest slots in terms of crafted modifiers since the early access launch. There was just such a limited pool of available modifiers, and there was also some notable modifier types that were entirely missing. This made Headhunter an even stronger option because it didn't have that much competition. But GGG has begun to solve this issue in patch 0.5 with newly introduced belt base types and modifiers from Breach Crafting, now allowing this slot to cater to many more build archetypes. This, combined with the introduction of Mageblood, has led to a huge decline in the usage of Headhunter, from 37% of level 90 plus characters 3 weeks into 0.4 to just 14% in 0.5. Meanwhile, Mageblood sits just above that at a 15% share, whilst the usage of rare belts has increased by about 14%, up to a total of 48% of level 90 plus characters in softcore trade Runes of Aldur. So at long last, the belt slot finally has some more options, and we'll hopefully see even more in patches to come. Now, it's going to be interesting to follow the build meta as it develops across patch 0.5 and on the road to the big 1.0 launch at the end of this year. We know that GGG are planning to do several economy resets in the gap between now and then, and we also know that one of their main focuses for those resets will be balance changes. So I do expect quite the shift to come during this time, maybe even several big meta shifts. But how exactly will it pan out? I'll be here to cover all of those changes when they do come around, but that's going to be it for this video. Thanks for watching, and as always, stay tuned and stay safe.